It's my honor to be the host for this special career exploration event. It's a career panel on bioinformatics and data scientists. So tonight I have 6 JAX scientists that are joining me today with different backgrounds and experiences in computational biology. And they're all very excited to share a bit about what they do and how they got to where they are today. And again, they're really looking forward to hearing from you. So please submit your questions in the box below at the bottom of your screen. So we are going to get started with our panelists just to introduce themselves a little bit. Bree, can you kick us off and tell us a little bit about what you do now and how you got to where you are?
Hi, everyone. My name's Bree Angelo. My full name's Brianne, but everyone knows me as Bree. I am currently with the Computational Sciences Department here at JAX. My background, however, wasn't initially in CS. My college education was to become a physician assistant. That's actually what I graduated college with, and decided that I just didn't have, the best way to put it is I didn't have the patience to treat patients. So I found myself in medical case management for a little while for an insurance company, and then kind of fell into a position at the IT PMO within Merck Pharmaceuticals, and have not looked back on not doing project management ever since. My husband is a military veteran, so we moved around quite a bit, and a mentor taught me very young that the key to, well, it was to being a military spouse, because you move so often, is being a strong project manager. And it doesn't matter what field you find yourself in, as long as you have strong project management field or skills, you can kind of make it work in any field. So I worked in manufacturing for a little while, IT consulting. I actually started at JAX in the IT department as a project manager, focusing more on our clinical portfolio. So it was able to kind of put the healthcare background and my IT technical background together. And then I jumped over to CS in 2018. So I guess the biggest thing for me is it doesn't really matter. Go to college and do something that you love to do. And then you don't have to stick with that. You can make career changes throughout your life. So just what you decide to do now doesn't mean that's what you have to stick with forever.
That's a great message, Bree, and I hope that we can explore a little bit more about the breadth of experiences that you've had in your career so far. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So yeah, my name's Chris Baker. I grew up in Texas, and I kind of went to college right out of high school, but I wasn't really mentally in the game. So, I think I left that first year of college with something like a 0.52 GPA out of 4.0. And so I kind of traveled for a while. I actually bought a Volkswagen bus and lived in it and traveled around for 2 or 3 years. Ended up in Vermont and working on a vegetable farm, and I really actually liked it. So I liked the science of agriculture, and I liked the genetics of plant breeding. And so, eventually inspired me to go to college at University of Vermont. And I was in the agricultural school, and I took a genetics course that just really hit off. And based on the faculty mentor in that genetics course, I was a total dork. I sat up front, I answered all the questions because I was just into it. And she really encouraged me to get in a lab and start working in some sort of lab research. And I really enjoyed that. And I love problem solving. And so I mostly was in school for biologicals. I mean, not computational based, but when I first went to school, I thought my career was going to be programming for game development companies. That's what I thought I wanted to do. I'm actually not a very good artist, so I don't really know. It didn't work out very well. But so when I went to graduate school at Dartmouth in New Hampshire, and then I came to the JAX for my postdoc, and ended up staying here as faculty. So I'm a research faculty here now. I have a lab of about 5 people and myself. And we do a variety of things, and we have both bench experiments as well as computational experiments. So I had to sort of learn computation and programming on the job as a postdoc, and I really enjoyed that. And JAX was a great place to do that, get that knowledge. Yeah, so happy to talk about the science if people are interested in particular about the science questions, but mostly we use sort of high throughput sequencing technologies to understand genetics.
Thanks so much for your honesty too about your background and your path. I think that's very relatable experience, but not everyone wants to talk about the lows in addition to the highs. So yeah, thank you for that honesty. Ali, can you go next, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ali, and I'm a postdoc in Jeff's lab. So what I mostly do there is computational. I was never thought of myself as someone who would very much like to do physical work, not even lab work. So more in the mood that I don't want to get out of bed to start working. So back in undergrad, and I think I should say that I'm from Iran. I did my undergrad in Sharif University in Iran. I did my undergrad in electrical engineering, focusing on signal processing techniques, mostly theory. And when I was doing my internship at a RCSTA, Research Center for Science and Technology in Medicine, I got exposed to this application of using signal processing, image processing techniques for analyzing MRI images. And I really liked it. So for grad school, I considered pursuing my signal processing love, but in the flavor of some biological applications. And looking around, I found this interesting position at Ohio State that there was Professor Dalton who was looking for a grad student to work on the problem of biomarker discovery from a mathematical perspective. So I applied, I got there, I did my PhD there, and there was so much math involved that I ended up getting a master's in math too. And after I graduated, I joined Jeff's lab, and since then I've still been analyzing data, doing machine learning, deep learning in the context of cancer research, analyzing biological data in my mind. I'm not that specific and not expert enough to comment what the underlying biology is. I mostly try to find the interesting patterns I want in the data and help the other people at JAX who are more focused on interpreting and the insight we get about cancer biology to interpret my data-driven results. So I think I should say that my wife is right now as assistant professor of mathematics in Arkansas Tech. So after the pandemic started, I moved in with my wife. And since then, most of the things I've been doing as a hobby has been, well, barbecuing in our backyard. And now I'm at a point that I'm thinking of maybe I should start brewing my own beer. So that's maybe something in the future.
Thank you for sharing your hobbies as well. This is great. I also really like that you're coming from a more computational math background, but you're applying it to biology. And I think we'll explore that topic a little bit later on. Martine, can you go next and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Martine Seignon. I grew up in Haiti, where I completed primary and secondary school, which would be the equivalent of high school here. And I did some university. And then some other events happened and I came to the United States, where I first went to a community college where I had to go into an English class for non-English speakers to prepare for college. And then from there, I obtained my associate degree with honors, and then transferred to Smith College in Massachusetts to get a bachelor's in arts in biological sciences with honors also. And that's where I fell into bioinformatics, because throughout this whole journey, biology was my soul. Anything genetics, molecular biology, and how biology and chemistry and physics makes everything work together was what I was passionate about. And then I fell into computational biology. So after college, I started working immediately. I went to the University of Miami, where I joined their computational department for their sequencing core. And I worked there for 3 years. And then in spring 2018, I joined JAX. They have the single cell biology lab, which is a fairly new technology, lot of great stuff coming out there, where I am a data analyst. It's It's bioinformatics, but you deal with the visualization and preliminary analysis for people. And I work with somebody else that develops the pipelines and the algorithms for the analysis I run. Yeah, and then outside of work, I crochet, I watch a ton of anime. Just fell into One Piece. If anybody is watching, I'm speechless. And also last year I started playing World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy 14. So I'm losing all the hours of my life outside of work. So that's it for me, yeah.
Great, Martine, thank you so much. I think you're also a great role model for anyone that is immigrating to the United States or even an English learner, and it's great to hear your story. Victor, why don't you go next, please?
So I'm Victor. I'm also in the lab of Jeff Chuang, same as Ali, but I'm an MD PhD student. I'm currently in the 4th year of my graduate phase. I can talk about that if anybody's interested in how the MD PhD program is structured. But my path to computational biology is, I guess, pretty straightforward. I've been a nerd for a long, long time. I started getting a computer science education at the age of 10. And then kind of stopped in high school when I decided that I wanted to pursue biology and the medical sciences more. And so when I went to the University of Maryland, I actually trained as a bioengineer, thinking I would do more wet lab work, do things like biophysics or tissue engineering, and then realized that doing cell culture was difficult and the cells didn't like to stay alive on me. And then I realized that I still had this wealth of knowledge to draw from in terms of my mathematical background and my computer science background. And that sort of led me to pursue computational biology questions. But I still did have a great love for biology and medicine, which kind of led me to decide that instead of just doing one or the other, I should do both, which some people think is crazy. I would definitely agree with them on that point. And so applying for graduate school and medical school, I definitely had to keep in mind that not everywhere has a good foundation to actually train someone who's interested in medicine and computational biology. And so that was definitely a struggle to find the right place to actually foster the things that I want to learn. And so Jeff Chuang's lab was great. Definitely had a lot of computational questions and a lot of cancer biology questions. Initially, I was supposed to be doing cancer genetics. It's kind of turned more into cancer immunology and imaging, which I have been trained in, so it hasn't been too much of a struggle, but it definitely was not what I had envisioned for a PhD, but it certainly taught me a lot about computational biology, tumor biology, and various different aspects that I can use in medicine. In terms of hobbies, normally in a non-pandemic world, I would probably be exercising more and playing basketball, but now it's mostly just watching football and hockey when it's on.
Thanks for sharing, Victor. I think your career path of this dual MD and PhD degree that you're pursuing will be of interest to a lot of our attendees. Okay, and close us out. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Anne. So I grew up in New Hampshire. Now I'm in Maine. And I originally went to school to be a surgeon. And I went to Valparaiso University, which is a little school in Indiana. And then sort of immediately decided that I didn't really like the competition of my peers. So I switched to sport management for a long time and ended up going to several schools in between. And I worked for a baseball team as an operations and merchandise intern, and went to an arena football team, worked on their front office staff for a while, and then made my way down to Tennessee to sort of finish out. And pretty much as soon as I got there, I switched back and decided that I did want to do science. I did want to be a doctor, and I got a microbiology degree. But while I was there, I actually joined a research lab, and I really, really liked what I was doing. I was playing with zebrafish. I did aquatic toxicology, nothing that I do now. But I loved the work. I really liked the projects and the thinking a lot about how to design an experiment, how to do things. And then while I was there, I actually was diagnosed with cancer, and I chose to stay and receive my treatment while I went to school, but you can imagine that affects a GPA. And so I started thinking, okay, if I can't be a doctor, if my GPA is not good enough for that right now, can I go another avenue and improve my GPA and circle back around? And so I actually sort of started the PhD as somewhat of a backup plan, because I knew I really liked research and I wanted to be autonomous. But I still wanted to kind of get an MD and be an MD PhD. And then I actually I applied to grad school. I actually didn't get in the first year. So I continued doing an internship at Oak Ridge National Lab as a mathematical biologist, and then sort of worked my way back around, got into grad school, decided I really wanted to combine the wet and the dry together if I could with the few classes I had taken in math. So I went and I got a bunch of other math classes, actually took a bunch of extra undergrad as a grad student, and then found that they had a free statistics master's if you were getting a PhD. So I actually decided to get the stats master's and move more towards statistics, and ended up doing a whole degree in metabolomics, even though I was in a genome science program. So I kind of just carved my own path and did my own thing, and ended up doing a lot of computational work just to analyze all that data, and had this really huge systems bio project, which then brought me to Greg's lab, where now I'm pretty much solely computational, but because I still like doing the wet lab, I now collaborate with another group at the lab, and they let me do wet lab work there. So sometimes I do mouse dissections, or I prep samples, or kind of whatever's needed for the project that I'm working on with them. And then we kind of just sort of, I flip back to computational and do all the follow-up analysis. Outside of that, I like to bike a lot. And I like doing lots of weird challenges. So I really like these military challenges that they start in the evening. You wear a backpack and you have like a either former or current special forces cadre is what they call them. So they're in the special forces military, and they bring you around a town and they make you do all these things, and you go for like 12 or 14 hours, and your team is whoever signed up for that day, and you have to just kind of do whatever. And you carry logs around town and do lots and lots of PT wherever you are. You look kind of crazy. The police are usually called at least once on you, but it's a fun time.
Wow, that sounds very intense, but it's quite impressive. And thank you so much for sharing your personal diagnosis and journey. And I think it sounds like you're in both the wet and the dry labs a little bit. So that would be interesting to talk about in a little bit. So thank you everyone for sharing these introductions. I think one question probably everyone has just regarding the theme of this panel is, what is bioinformatics and why did you choose to go into it? So some of you have talked about it, but I think this is a kind of a new field for several students starting out in science and biology. So what does bioinformatics mean for you? And maybe if you could talk about your first exposure to kind of data science and bioinformatics. Anyone can jump in first.
I can start. My first exposure to bioinformatics was when I was the last year of my bachelor's program. I decided to do an independent project, and that was part of graduating with honors. So most of the credits were going towards that project. And after I've done, I did all the wet lab work. Since the organism I was working with, a nematode, didn't have a reference at the time to do like just a simple analysis, we had to think about de novo alignment for it, and finding target sequences for medication.
So you're saying you're doing genomics, like sequencing, reading the genome of the organism, but there was no reference. So you didn't actually know what the sequence was supposed to be. So you kind of had to figure it out.
Right, exactly. So you use an organism that's closely related to that nematode as a guideline, but still you're gonna have to come up with what that new sequence is. So it started with me having to work with a student that was in computational science department, but then she couldn't for some specific reason. So I just took it on. I didn't understand at the time what I was getting myself into, but I was like, yeah, of course, I totally do it. Then I started reading on, just alignment algorithms alone. And I'm like, okay, oof, okay. So from there, I was referred to an online-based analysis tool called Galaxy. And from there, more questions, and I had to contact the people who wrote it. And then from there, conferences took place that I went to and talked to more people. So curiosity kind of killed the cat along the way. And I got more and more. The next month, I was installing my programs. Just to tell everybody, my first computer I ever owned, I was 22. So computational things were not on my radar at all. So my first exposure was college here in the United States was when I was exposed to any type of computational anything. So I emailed a bunch of people at the Broad Institute, anybody that had their name on a paper that's computational pipeline, I emailed them and they were very patient with me. But the activation energy or the entry level took a while. You get discouraged when stuff is yelling at you that it doesn't work and you don't know how to read error messages yet. So it feels like it's never ending and maybe you'll never get this. So it happened by mistake that I fell into bioinformatics, but I'm glad it did. It took a while. I got a B in data science and I will never forget this, but I'm fine, I survived it. So yeah, accident.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of you have talked about how kind of your first, like your intended field was biology or genetics or something, like more physical health, like something that you can touch and see and feel working in the lab, working with people, something like that. But it has shifted now to incorporating more, if not exclusively, data, computational, computer science kind of thing. So yeah, thanks Martine for sharing that story. And I'm wondering if anyone else can kind of follow up on that and talk about even, when did you first learn to code? Did you know how to code? Did you learn it along the way? Like how was that for you?
So,
go ahead, Brianna.
Go ahead,
Ann. So I guess my first coding was actually in high school. We had a professor from the community college come in and teach everybody C++ if you wanted to do that. And so I thought, sure, why not? And then I hated it. I mean, it was awful. And I couldn't do it and I couldn't figure it out. And I could barely print hello world, which is like the starter code for everybody. And my dad actually had to take time off of work because he's an electrical engineer and he could code. So he took time off of work to help me catch up on my homework because I was so far behind. And he sat with me all day and helped me teach. And I thought, I'm never doing this again. I'm getting out and I'm never touching code ever. And then as time went on, I started seeing, okay, biology is really moving more computational. This is definitely something I need to pay attention to. and I don't want to be left behind. So, and I really liked math in general, so I started taking math, but then math came with MATLAB. So I had to start doing that, and I hated that as well. And I was like, oh man, this is just, I really don't like coding. This is terrible. But I did it, and we made it through, and it was fine. And then I had a professor who wanted me to learn R, which is what I code in now. And so I went through and I started taking those, and I thought, oh, okay, this is all right, it's fine, whatever, but I don't like it. And then I took another class in grad school, and all the homework was in R. It was just a non-negotiable. And day one, I was asking for extensions. And the guy was like, nope, you can't, like, you'll be fine. It was the hardest class I've probably ever taken. But once I got over the curve and it kind of started going downhill a little bit, all of a sudden it felt okay. And then all of a sudden I just felt like this magician. It was like, man, I can do all these things. Like, this is all amazing. But it took so many starts and stops and frustration. And finally, once I sort of forced it to click, I feel like it's probably, I don't think there was like a magic, like, oh, it just all makes sense to me now. It was more like I just kept sort of forcing it until I kind of got to a point where it was like, okay, now it's not so hard to learn other languages. So it really wasn't like any one particular language is the key to all of them. It's kind of more like once you learn one, the others get a little bit simpler. And I think that was probably the best way to do it, even though it was, I just don't think there's a like non-painful way to learn sometimes, unless you have a brain for it. Where
well,
it just,
I appreciate your honesty of just showing your resilience and just, just keep on trying. And I think that's a really important thing to show that, maybe some people, they really have a knack for it, but other people really have to like keep on trying. And if it's, needed for your field, then you're determined to keep on doing it. So thanks for sharing that. Bree, you also had a comment before Anne started. Did you want to follow up?
Yes, and actually Anne kind of triggered a few things. So I wrote my first, it wasn't even writing a first piece of code. I don't consider it that, but my first experience with writing code and launching a VM happened in 2018 during a workshop for bringing Google Cloud Platform to JAX. So I was running a workshop. So I'm a project manager. So my job is to make sure that the people working on the project, doing the coding, developing the pipelines, the people doing all the magical things have everything they need to do all the magical things and do it successfully. Any roadblocks that pop up, I deal with. Any problems or risks, I figure out how to mitigate before they happen. That's my job, and to make sure everyone stays on track. So I was sitting in on this workshop, and one of our colleagues set up an account for me and told me to just, work along with everyone else. And he had to step in and help me a few times, but I didn't. Was super excited and like got way more excited than anyone else in the class when I launched this VM. But it was awesome. I never thought I'd be able to do something like that. And I think part of that goes back to, I have learning disabilities, and I was actually in special ed when I was in first, second, third grade. I have a very mild form of dyslexia, so numbers and words kind of get mixed up sometimes. So for me, for coding, there's too many sequences of numbers and letters, and my brain likes to reverse them all the time, and phone numbers are hard for me sometimes. But I found a way to support the science and support people who are doing these really amazing things.
So Bree, thanks for sharing that, personal learning disability. And a few of you now have mentioned, Anne also mentioned, kind of a personal medical, illness. And so I'm wondering kind of what bioinformatics might afford you in your life based on your either illness or lifestyle and obstacle that you've had to overcome, or even now these days in COVID times when we're working remotely and all of the, abilities that we have to work from our computers and not being tied to the bench. So does anyone want to elaborate a little bit about kind of how bioinformatics has affected personally your life, and your path in data science has affected you personally?
Okay, I have sickle cell disease, and if anybody in the audience knows what it means or doesn't, chronic pain is the main symptom. And when, like I said before, molecular biology is my heart and soul, and even when I fell into bioinformatics, I'm like, yeah, of course, I'm always going back to the lab because I just love playing with that stuff. But the more I stayed in the bioinformatics field, the more I understood how the amount of stress I had just thinking, oh, if I miss this experiment timeline, it's gonna be all over again. I'm gonna waste a bunch of reagent if I don't show up, because you can't tell, right? I can have a pain episode like right now, or 2 minutes from now. Just having the freedom to just have a project, work on it. If it's done, it's done. It doesn't matter the timeline. I can work in the middle of the night. I can work while I'm in bed if I'm able to. And the stressor of having to go to the lab physically walking, because I'm in between. I'm needing a cane or needing a wheelchair because I can't use my legs. That's how much the pain is bad. So it kind of, I was reticent because I'm like, if I accept this, I will not go back to the lab, and I don't want this, but it just happens. It works perfectly for me. So I'm having fun with it. To be honest, I only got to like 2 years ago to really accept, okay, this is the path I want to take. But yes, this is how it's helped me as a career to choose to do computational biology, especially in COVID. I don't have to be in the lab and worry that I'm going to miss a day because I'm sick and cells are going to go bad or samples are going to go bad.
You can still contribute to science and be a scientist. Yes. Don't have to be in the lab. Yep. And so Ali, you were also mentioning that, just because of the nature of the work that you do, you were separated from your wife because of your jobs, but now you're able to finally be together, and you can still do your work.
Yep, I completely agree with that, it's one of the perks that you can be anywhere and do your job. All you need is a computer and an internet connection. It is an interesting task for me. This is what I want to do. I'm more interested in the data itself. I might agree that, it might be less stressful than doing a wet lab experiment, because in that you have very hard constraints on when something needs to be done. But when it's bioinformatics and you're mostly doing data analysis, you're a lot more flexible. But there's the other side of the coin, that you're always available. You can always work. So you get this idea, you want to work on it. So you might end up actually working more than you were planning to, or end up working unusual hours. It's not a 9-to-5 job anymore. So that might come with its own challenges, but I think it's still much easier to work from home and be flexible rather than have these constraints of a wet lab experiment. It's fun to do bioinformatics.
Sure, it's the big pro that you can work anywhere, anytime, but that's also the big con, is that you can work anywhere, anytime. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of specifics about what you guys do. So maybe Chris, because your research in your lab straddles both wet lab and dry lab. So if you could talk about how the work that you do and what's the bioinformatics side and what's the wet lab side, what are some questions that you're answering, and how do you do those things?
Yeah, sure. So, I think thinking about a question of what is bioinformatics, it's a pretty broad topic, right? And you've already, audience has already heard some examples of where it's applied. There's people who are algorithm development or machine learning, really, I would say more pure computational biology, and on the development side, perhaps. And then, there's also just the sort of analysis side, also perhaps you just have a set of sequencing data and you want to know what it says about it. So maybe you're using tools that have already been developed, but still require programming skill to run or stick different tools together that I've already developed that don't necessarily work together. So, you know, I don't really do a lot of algorithm development, but I have learned how to write code in Python and R for those reasons. You know, a lot of it's either sometimes it's just data wrangling, so getting things in different formats so that the tools can speak together. So there's all sorts of levels, but I'd say that what ties them together largely is working in a sort of command line environment where you're programming code at some level. And I would say, like Martine, my first experience doing that was, you know, I had a biological question and I had generated a data set with a new technology at that time, which was high throughput sequencing, and I didn't know how to get the answer, and there wasn't like services available at our institute yet to do that for you. And at that point, there was some effort towards making maybe more user-friendly bioinformatic tools, like what, Martin, what'd you say that was? It was called, not Gateway, what was it?
Galaxy.
Galaxy, thank you, yes. So I remember using Galaxy as well, and you know, that really is more like maybe a gateway. That's why I remember that into the bioinformatic field, because you know, the options are very limited and you don't understand what's happening. And as soon as you get a piece of data back and you want to ask another question, you know, you really want to be able to get at the underlying method to run those tools. So I think it's a great way to get interested in a problem, but you very quickly are going to want to work on command lines. So anyway, the kind of things we do are at big level, we're sort of interested in Chromatin Organization. So DNA is organized in cells in chromatin, which is sort of a complex of protein and DNA. And, you know, so like every cell in your body has the same DNA sequence, but obviously the cells in your bodies have totally different functions. Like heart does a lot, the cells in a heart do a lot different things than cells in a liver. And so that sort of process of developmental differentiation and how the same DNA sequence is interpreted and becomes function, you know, the cells become functional through development, early development, particularly embryonic development is one of the areas of our research. And so we use embryonic stem cells to study that because you can grow them in a dish and add components to that dish and make them become different types of cells, which is pretty cool, actually. And so we want to understand, so we use a lot of methods, and we're starting to move more towards, like Martine mentioned, single cell DNA, single cell approaches for sequencing, understanding what genes are transcribed in these cells, understanding the chromatin structure in these cells and how those two things are combined. And then we bring in one more aspect of it, which is we're really interested in how genetic variation impacts all of these processes. So, you know, we all have a genome, but there are slightly, you know, small variants amongst all of us that make us a little bit different from each other. And we want to know how genetic variation impacts or influences some of these differentiation cues during development. And so we study diverse panels of embryonic stem cells derived from, in this case, mice that are from different genetic backgrounds. So we bring up, so there's the bioinformatics aspect, which is the sort of high throughput sequencing analysis and data processing and downstream trying to understand and build models from that. And then there's also the genetic aspect, which is a whole nother sort of, it's often referred to like systems genetic or genetic mapping. So there's a set of bioinformatic methods that are applied for that as well to understand that, sort of make associations between DNA variants and a particular phenotype. So I don't know about getting into more detail, like what that is. So
following up on Chris's point about the research and that, you know, it's kind of the genetics of bioinformatics seems to be taking some cells, whether they're from a model organism like mice or maybe humans, and reading the DNA. Is that accurate? But I think some of you guys do not just pure genetics, code sequencing, right? So I think Victor and Ali, you guys do something a little bit different.
Yeah, so I think we both of us do a lot of image analysis. I think Victor knows his research best, but about what I do, so I mostly am now working on the application of deep learning AI methods for automated pathology. That in addition to, we have these cells, we have these genes, they are active or more active or less active that they should be. We might have a mutation. But on top of all those things, our lab believes that there are important spatial relations, that how these cells are distributed within amongst each other, which cells are close to each other, which cells are far from each other. And we believe that it tells us some information that we might not be able to grasp with other techniques that we gather information about genomic properties of a cell. And to that end, I typically use deep learning techniques. And a problem with those, and particularly image analysis, is that it is difficult. That is, for the things that maybe Chris is doing, we say, all right, this is a gene. If it has this mutation in this cancer patient, then this protein might have this other structure. So use this drug to suppress it, or if this gene is off, you have to turn it back on. And that is easy to interpret, you know, the quantity that you're working with. But if I show you the image of a cat and you tell me it is a cat, then how did you realize that? How did your brain realize it is a cat? So although images seem to be the easiest thing to work with at the beginning, when you delve into them, they become the most challenging because you don't even, it is so obvious you don't even know what you're looking at. So we're using these techniques to better encode what patterns are in an image and how we can connect them to the genomic features of the cancer cells we have there to better figure out the underlying cancer biology and help with, it's a long way to clinical practice, but the hope is that then we would learn more about the underlying cancer dynamics so we can better understand how a patient is suffering from cancer in their own specific way.
That's really interesting, Ali, and you bring up, you know, the implications of your research on tumor images and the implications in the clinic. So we have Victor on the call, who is an aspiring physician, a scientist physician. Would you want to talk a little bit about the implications of your research and how you see data science fit into the medical world and, you know, either treatments or, you know, understanding diseases a little bit better?
Yeah, we've learned a lot about, you know, how the immune system affects a patient with cancer, both in the clinic and from the scientific side. And the genetics and the genomics have taught us a lot about sort of the makeup of cancers, the makeup of the immune system. But as Ali was saying, the way that cells sort of interact in the tumor is very important, not just whether or not they exist. And so I'm not like Ali, where I have a deep understanding of machine learning and AI to actually apply these sorts of methods, but I'm more of a traditional image processing kind of person. You know, try what sort of textural features there are that might say something about the immune cells. You know, what are the immune cells actually doing? And so the hope is that we kind of understand the dynamics. Well, I guess because they're images, they're not really dynamics, but the function of these immune cells in a tumor that might be beneficial to patients in some way. And the field hasn't really moved that much in that direction yet. It's still very much a budding field. So we're hoping that kind of the advancements that we make in the research lab are sort of able to leap into that clinical phase once they show some level of benefit to patients.
In our last 10 minutes, I'd like to talk about a little bit about the practical nature of the work. So like what skills are necessary to pursuing bioinformatics, data science, STEM in general, but you know, kind of the work that you guys do. So it sounds like coding isn't necessarily a prerequisite starting out. A lot of you didn't know coding getting into it. But what are some other skills that you would identify that are important in what you do or were important in your journey to getting you here?
I think a huge skill that's important no matter what field you go into or where you go in life is communication skills and learning how to work with people who communicate or think differently than yourself. That has been a hugely valuable skill that I developed from taking workshops at conferences, just doing some reading and research, but learning to work with people who have a different working style than your own. It's a huge asset, and it'll take you very far in life. So that's my biggest skill that I think everyone could learn. And there are a lot of self-assessments that you could take that have to do with the 4 different personality types or the 4 different communication styles. There's always 4 different whatevers for whatever reason. It's always broken into 4, but it helps you gain an understanding of how other people might think, because I can guarantee that your train of thought is not the same as someone else. And learning to acknowledge that and work with others will take you very far.
Thanks, Bree. Someone else? Martine?
So I'm gonna do 2 groups. One would be the same as Bree said. Universal skill would be learning flexibility, I guess. So, and also learning to bend whatever it is that the way you think, and bending it into the new field you're trying to get into, because it's gonna make the learning curve a little bit less steeper.
Being adaptable, you would say?
I'm sorry?
Like being adaptable?
Yes, right. So when I was learning how to program, like Anne, I started with R and then had to shift to Python. But I kind of got into thinking of those computational languages or programming languages because I speak different languages. So I use the same tactics I used when I was learning English to learn how to program in those different languages. So it makes it easier for me, for my brain to understand what our tactics is going to be to learn this new language. So whatever it is that helps you learn in a different field that you're passionate about, see if you can bend it into what it is that you're trying to do at this point in time. More practical for what I feel like I learned in college that's helping me now as a bioinformatic analyst or analyst. Some level of understanding when it comes to designing experiments, because even in the analysis side, somebody will tell you, okay, this is how I set up my experiment. You analyze it, but depending on what they told you, you're going to decide how you're going to analyze this data or what confounding variables you need to think about, depending on how the experiment was designed. So yeah, and some level of statistic. I would say if you don't like Comp Sci 101, like I ran away from it, I took data science instead. It's gonna be mainly, economics and baseball and all that stuff, but it can translate into biology, trust me. So I would say these few classes helped me a lot. Stats, some experience with lab work. It doesn't have to be extensive, but yeah.
And if you don't mind, I just want to emphasize that I do agree with Bree and Martine that you do need really good communication skills because of the interdisciplinary nature of this work. You're talking with a lot of different backgrounds. So people who might have a different jargon, who might have a different light, different expertise. So you have to be able to communicate with them. And I do agree with Martin that again, it's interdisciplinary and you cannot say, oh, I just want to be a biologist, do wet lab, I just want to do experiment, or that I just want to be coding and I don't care about the other aspects. No, that is something that you do need to learn. And the more you learn about it, the easier your job would be for you and the more impact you can have in the field. But a unique skill that comes with bioinformatics is being able to translate the same problem in different flavors. That I have this biology question about about cancer. how can I turn it into a math problem and solve it mathematically? I have this mathematical model. How can I translate it into a programming question so I can implement it on a computer? How does this programming simulation, this computational analysis mean? What does it mean biologically? Can I translate these results into a biological hypothesis that I further need to validate? So being able to go back and forth between these fields and translate a statement or a question in one field as a problem in another field is, I'd say, is a very unique skill that we highly need these days.
Yeah, I like what you said too, and that sometimes it's often the same problem, but you just can see it from different angles, you know, from the math side, from the computational side, from the biology side, and all are important to solving the riddle, solving the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
In our final few minutes, I'd love to hear just some words of advice to our students that are watching, anyone that's starting out in STEM or in data science. Maybe it's advice that you received in your journey, or maybe it's career advice that you wish you had. Do you guys have anything you'd like to share with our aspiring data scientists?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have any words of advice specifically that sound pithy, but I would say, you know, I think what you've heard from this group, which has been reinforced by everyone, is that, you know, they really ran into stumbling blocks, or they ran into hard or things that were challenging. And, you know, so perseverance really generally in any field will serve you really well. And you have to love the challenge. Like people say, oh, it's hard. This has been hard, or I find it hard, but like, that didn't necessarily stop any of us. I think, you know, that actually is that challenge or that problem solving, you know, the drive to solve the problem is what I think keeps a lot of us going. So I just think, you know, perseverance and being curious, that will get you far.
And if you don't mind me saying, so the first thing is that if you want to think about a career you want to have in the future, pursue something that you love. You're going to spend so much time working that if you don't love your job, life's not going to be worth living. It is such a big aspect of your life that loving what you do has its own perks. And the other thing I want to emphasize that at this age, if you're in high school, well, it's an investment. Whatever you learn is something that will come in handy later in life, and that will change your future. But although I want to tell you not to waste time, but try to enjoy life as well. I still remember my high school days, and those days don't repeat. So enjoy life one day at a time. Each day has its own taste, and don't miss it.
I'll throw one more thing in the mix. You got to find the right people, the right mentors who will help you get to where you want to be. Because they're the ones that are going to guide you and teach you the things that you need to know, and will pick you up when you fall.
To add to what Victor just said, finding the right mentor, and sometimes in your journey to finding the right mentor, there are going to be people that are going to discourage you. Get a second opinion, like you're going to a doctor. Get a second opinion from somebody. So yeah.
And I know everyone's saying how much they love their job, and I love my job as well, but no job is perfect. So don't get discouraged if you're struggling. But I'm lucky enough that I love my job enough and feel like it's bigger than me, that even on the worst days, I can walk out to my car, well, not anymore walking out to the car and going to the parking lot because I'm home. So I can walk into the house, you know, see my dogs, go for a walk, and okay, tomorrow's a new day, I'll start over. But it keeps me coming back. And you need to make sure that you're also able to speak up for yourself, and you're not afraid to say no, and you're not afraid to speak up if you have too much on your plate. So just learn those skills, because those are very valuable skills and normally come as you've been working in your field for a while.
And why don't you share your final closing thoughts?
Yeah, I was just also going to piggyback off of Victor and Martine. As far as mentors, also don't be afraid if it's not a good fit to consider switching. I know sometimes those decisions can be really difficult. I actually had 2 PhD advisors, but sometimes it's the right move, and you have to take that leap to get to the right spot.
Thank you all so much. This is great advice. And I just want to tell our attendees that we received several questions about kind of financial considerations about school and other types of questions about the field. I would encourage you to check out yesterday's live event. The recording is up on the site. It's the Science After High School event. And we touch on a lot of these topics that are just kind of general working in STEM and going into your career. Also, if anything from here kind of piqued your interest, we have several topics on bioinformatics so that you can try out bioinformatics for yourself. You don't have to wait to get a job. You can try it out right now during Open House Week. Actually, Ali has a great talk on there about his research, and there are a few lessons and another career chat. So be sure to check out and start exploring. So with that, I want to thank my panelists so much for their time and sharing all of this information with us and about their personal experiences. Thank you all so much for being here.